In the early hours of the morning, my phone lit up with a text message from my own son. It read, "Dad, plans changed. You are not coming on the cruise next week. Vanessa wants only her family there." Without waiting another day, I pulled the payments, put their house on the market, and walked away from that town. Welcome back to Dad Revenge. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found your way. Before we go any further, if these stories speak to something you've lived or witnessed, tap subscribe so the next one reaches you without you having to go looking for it. Now, before I get into today's story, I want to ask you something simple from what you've heard so far. Whose side do you find yourself on? And why? Drop it in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. One more thing before we begin: some details in this story have been shaped for the purposes of audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is entirely coincidental. It's the truth inside the story that matters. It was a Tuesday, 6 in the morning. Outside my window, the Portland sky hung low and wet, that thick iron gray that settles over the city and refuses to leave. I sat at my kitchen table nursing a black tea. The house was still. It had been a painful kind of still for 3 years, ever since my wife Lorraine passed away. I was staring at the empty chair across from me, thinking about her, when my phone buzzed against the cold marble countertop. A text from Cole, my 34-year-old son, a man I had ground myself down on construction sites to give a decent life to. I picked it up, expecting something ordinary about our upcoming trip. Flight details, maybe. Luggage tags. What I got instead hit me square in the chest, like something solid. "Dad, plans changed. You are not coming on the cruise next week. Vanessa wants only her family there." I sat motionless in the dim kitchen light, reading those words over and over, willing them to rearrange into something less cruel. "You are not coming on the cruise. Vanessa wants only her family there." My chest went tight. Let me give you the context you need to understand what I was really looking at. This was no cut-rate weekend trip to a nearby resort. This was a 10-day ultra-luxury Alaskan cruise. I had paid exactly $45,000 for it, the full amount charged to my personal platinum credit card. I never asked my son or his wife to chip in so much as $1. I paid because I wanted to honor Lorraine. Alaska was the destination she had always dreamed of reaching, but we never got there. I was always working, always building, always pouring every last drop of myself into securing a financial future for Cole. After she died, I made myself a promise I would take our son on that voyage to mark her birthday. I reserved the owner's suite, the finest room aboard the entire ship, a sprawling space with panoramic ocean views, a private balcony, and a dedicated butler. I even arranged helicopter tours over the glaciers ahead of time. I booked it for all 3 of us, me, Cole, and his 31-year-old wife, Vanessa. I wanted us together. I wanted to share something meaningful and lasting with the only family I still had. And now my son was sending a gutless text at 6 in the morning, casually cutting me out of my own $45,000 gift, because his wife preferred her people there instead. A cold, heavy silence settled over the kitchen. I set down my mug. My hands were completely steady. When you spend 4 decades running massive construction sites, managing corrupt suppliers and useless foremen, you learn quickly that rage is a wasted tool. You don't throw tantrums. You solve the problem. I tapped Cole's name on the screen and placed the call. The line rang once, twice. Then nothing. It cut off entirely. He had rejected it. My own son, the boy I used to carry on my shoulders, the man whose college tuition I had paid in full and in cash, was too spineless to pick up the phone. Cole had always lacked backbone. He had happily surrendered his mother's tough love foundation in exchange for Vanessa's suffocating grip on every corner of his life. I drew a slow, steadying breath, steeling himself, and dialed again. This time someone answered, but it wasn't Cole. Hello, Gerald. It was Vanessa. Her voice was low and tightly wound, coated in that practiced counterfeit politeness she deployed whenever she was about to say something genuinely poisonous. She didn't call me Dad. She almost never did. I kept my tone flat and even holding the storm well below the surface. Put my son on the phone, Vanessa. She exhaled a small theatrical sigh, irritated that I wasn't simply accepting the dismissal. Cole is in the shower right now, Gerald, she said smoothly. And honestly, there's really nothing to discuss. He sent you the text. The plans have changed. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the bleak morning sky. Vanessa, I said, each word measured and deliberate. That is a $45,000 trip. I booked the owner suite for us to celebrate Lorraine. You don't simply flip the plans and cut out the man who funded the whole thing. I could hear her shifting on the other end. Faintly in the background, water was running, Cole hiding in the shower. Then she said the words that finally demolished whatever remained of any family illusion I'd been clinging to. Look, Gerald, she said quietly, her tone sliding into something cold and condescending. Tico, my parents have never been on a luxury vacation in their entire lives. They really deserve this experience. Plus, my brother Trent is coming too. Let's be honest here. Older people like you get seasick so easily. It's a real liability. You'd just be worn out and grumbling the whole time. My parents are in far better shape to actually enjoy the owner suite. I closed my eyes. The sheer nerve of this woman left me breathless. She was seizing my generous gift money I had earned, a tribute I had planned for my dead wife, and repurposing it as a fully funded luxury holiday for her own parents and her freeloading brother. People who had never put a single cent toward her life, let alone ours. I stayed completely silent on the line, letting every ugly word she'd spoken hang there unanswered. Vanessa read my silence as surrender. She was certain she'd won. She believed she was dealing with a worn-out, lonely old fool who would absorb the insult quietly because he was too starved for family to fight back. We'll make sure to pick up some nice souvenirs from the ports, Gerald, she added, her voice drenched in hollow sympathy. Just stay home. Relax. Enjoy the time to yourself. We'll see you when we get back. And without waiting for a single word from me, she ended the call. The line went dead, leaving me alone in the dark kitchen. I lowered the phone slowly and placed it on the cold marble island. For a long moment, I simply stood there listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock on the wall. Vanessa's voice was still ringing in my head. Older people like you get sick at sea so easily. You'd just be tired and complaining the whole time. Another man in another life might have erupted, might have hurled his mug across the room, rang his son back again and again, demanded tears and explanations. I did none of that. 40 years running a commercial construction operation in Portland teaches you to process betrayal differently. You don't survive 4 decades of crooked suppliers' shortcuts on steel and brutal contract fights by coming apart at the seams. In this business, when a foundation gives way or a load-bearing beam fails under pressure, you don't grieve it. You pull out the blueprints, you assess what held and what didn't, and you locate the rot with precision. Then you cut it out. No hesitation, no sentiment. I walked calmly out of the kitchen, leaving my tea untouched on the counter, and moved down the hallway to my private study. The floorboards gave their familiar creak underfoot, a sound I knew by heart, in a house that now felt far too large and far too cold. I settled into the chair behind my heavy walnut desk, opened the laptop, and waited while the screen came to life, its pale glow spreading across the quiet room. I needed to see the full extent of what I was dealing with. I pulled up my personal email and found the original booking confirmation from Royal Caribbean without much searching. The receipt was right there, 45,000 billed directly to my personal platinum credit card, no hesitation. I remembered the day I'd made that booking, sitting in this same chair. I'd been looking at a framed photo of Lorraine on the desk, her face lit up on a coastal trip from years back, and I had felt something close to purpose. I was building us a lasting memory, a grand and fitting tribute to the woman who had been the cornerstone of our family. I had chosen the owner suite deliberately, the finest accommodation on the ship, because I genuinely wanted Cole to know the kind of abundance I had spent a lifetime working to create. I highlighted the booking reference number, copied it, and opened the cruise line's passenger portal. My hands were steady as I pasted the code into the secure login field and pressed enter. The small blue loading icon turned for a few seconds before the full reservation details appeared on the screen. I stared at the bright screen, blinking, leaning in closer as my eyes moved quickly across the passenger manifest. I scrolled to the primary guest details section, fully expecting to find my name, Gerald Whitaker, sitting at the top as the account holder and lead passenger. It wasn't there. Not bumped down to a secondary cabin. Not reassigned to some standard interior room. Completely and surgically wiped from the entire booking. Where my name had every right to be heading, the master bedroom of the owner suite, sat the name Clifford Harlow. Directly beneath him, Nadine Harlow, Vanessa's parents. The very people who had spent the past 5 years lobbing thinly veiled, self-satisfied digs at my blue-collar roots. Eyeing the calluses on my hands across every Thanksgiving table were now listed as the primary occupants of a $45,000 luxury suite I had paid for out of my own pocket. A cold, tight knot formed in my gut, but I forced myself to keep scrolling. 2 more passengers were attached to the reservation, Cole Whitaker and Vanessa Harlow. 4 people total. The owner suite was built for 6. I found the final passenger slot, the one that should have had my name in it, without any question. Instead, Trent Harlow. Trent, Vanessa's 32-year-old brother, a profoundly idle man who had washed out of 2 different colleges, been let go from 3 entry-level jobs I had personally arranged for him as a favor, and who currently lived rent-free in his parents' basement, running through video games all day. This fully grown man, who had never once thought to buy me so much as a cheap cup of coffee, was now officially registered to enjoy the private balcony, the personal butler, and the premium dining packages I had funded with decades of physical labor. They hadn't simply uninvited me. That alone would have been cruel enough, but this was something far more deliberate. Someone had logged into my private account, hijacked the paid reservation, and methodically replaced me with the entire Harlow family. They had stolen my deeply personal gift and converted it into an all-expenses-paid luxury getaway for people who meant nothing to me. I eased back in my leather chair and let the full weight of the betrayal settle into my bones. Vanessa had engineered every piece of this. I knew exactly how she operated. She was a master of quiet, corrosive control, always packaging her most selfish demands as acts of care, of reason, of emotional necessity. She had almost certainly persuaded Cole that I was too old, too fragile, or too grief-heavy to belong on a festive vacation. She had likely constructed some polished, believable story where bringing her family was actually doing me a kindness, sparing me the strain of long ocean travel. And Cole, my gutless, cowardly son, had let her do it without a word of resistance. He had stood aside while his manipulative wife logged into the portal, deleted his grieving father's name, and handed a small fortune in luxury travel to his insufferable in-laws. He had said nothing while they gutted a trip specifically planned to honor his own mother's memory. The betrayal was so calculated, so coldly malicious, that it burned away whatever remaining softness I had been holding on to. I looked at the booking details one more time. The ship was set to depart in exactly 7 days next Tuesday. The boarding passes were already generated. The luggage tags were printed. The drink packages were selected. I could see on the screen that Trent had already gone in and upgraded his own beverage package to the highest tier available, giving himself unlimited access to top-shelf liquor around the clock. Every one of these charges was tied directly to my personal platinum credit card, which was still sitting in the ship's system as the default payment method for all onboard expenses going forward. They genuinely believed they had won. They were absolutely convinced they had outmaneuvered me completely. Vanessa had looked me over and decided I was a broken old man who would absorb the disrespect in silence, stay home, and accept her hollow pity because I was too desperate for my son's scraps of affection to make any trouble. She had mistaken my quiet on the phone for the silence of a man who had already surrendered. She had no idea who she was actually dealing with. She didn't understand that a man who spent 40 years surviving the brutal cutthroat world of commercial contracting does not simply walk away from his own assets. I did not build expensive structures by letting greedy people walk off with my materials. I did not accumulate what I had by allowing entitled parasites to drain my accounts without facing serious consequences. I sat there staring at the screen, trailing the cursor slowly over the Harlow family names. A cold, sharp clarity settled across my mind, unhurried and complete. The grief had gone, evaporated entirely into the early morning air. In its place was something focused and precise, tactical, the kind of energy that doesn't shout at plans. I reached for the leather-bound notepad I kept centered on my desk and clicked my pen. I began writing a careful, detailed list. I did not cancel the cruise tickets right then. That would have been far too simple, a brief inconvenience they could have scrambled to fix. I wanted something else entirely. I wanted them to pack their designer luggage with anticipation. I wanted them to make the drive to the port together, laughing. I wanted them to board that ship, feel the cold ocean wind on their faces, and savor the full flush of their stolen triumph. I wanted them locked on that vessel before a single thing changed. I closed the laptop with a quiet, deliberate snap. The foundation of this family hadn't merely cracked. It was rotten all the way through. And it was time to bring the whole structure down. My phone vibrated against the hard surface of the kitchen island, breaking the morning stillness. I looked at the screen. Cole's name in bold black letters. It had been exactly 22 minutes since Vanessa had cut off the call. 22 minutes of silence while my son worked up whatever thin sliver of nerve it took to face his own father. I let it vibrate 3 times. I wanted him uncomfortable. I wanted him sitting in the full weight of what he'd done before I gave him a moment of my time. On the 4th ring, I reached over and accepted the call. I brought the phone to my ear and said nothing, just breathed, waiting for him to go first. No greeting, no warmth, just silence pressing down on his guilty conscience. "Dad, are you there?" Cole's voice came through the speaker, unsteady, thin wound, tight with anxiety. "Yes, Cole. I am here," I answered, completely flat. No trace of fatherly warmth. The same tone I used with dishonest concrete suppliers who thought they could short me on a commercial job. I heard him swallow hard. "Listen, Dad." He stumbled almost immediately over his own rehearsed words. "I'm really sorry about how all of this is coming out. Vanessa didn't mean to sound harsh on the phone earlier. It's just that we're dealing with a very sensitive, complicated medical situation right now." I stayed completely silent, making him scramble to fill the dead air. "Vanessa has been struggling with severe clinical depression for the last few months." Cole continued, his voice dropping to a hushed, dramatically grave whisper. "Her licensed therapist strongly recommended that she needs a completely stress-free, supportive environment to properly heal. The doctor specifically said she should spend quality, uninterrupted time with just her immediate family. Her parents and her brother know how to handle her emotional triggers. I listened to this carefully constructed lie spilling out of my 34-year-old son's mouth. The level of manipulation was genuinely staggering. They were weaponizing mental health to justify stealing a $45,000 luxury vacation. I knew perfectly well that Vanessa was not suffering from severe clinical depression. Just 3 days earlier, I had seen her celebrating loudly with a crowd of friends at an upscale downtown Portland restaurant, drinking premium cocktails and laughing until she could barely catch her breath. This therapy narrative was a perfectly timed fabrication engineered to cast me as the villain if I dared object to their theft. "It's just for her mental health, Dad," Cole pleaded, his voice growing increasingly desperate for my agreement. "You know how critical family support is during a serious psychological crisis. We didn't want to burden you with her emotional baggage on what's supposed to be a fun, relaxing trip. You'd just be stressed out trying to accommodate her dietary needs and therapy schedules. It's honestly much better for everyone if you stay home and relax. We fully intend to pay you back for your ticket eventually. Once our finances stabilize, we'll set up a monthly payment plan to reimburse you. Please, Dad, just try to understand our position. Please don't ruin this healing journey for us by getting angry." I closed my eyes, a deep wave of disappointment moving through me. I thought about my late wife, Lorraine. She had been a fiercely resilient woman who believed absolutely in personal accountability. When Cole was a teenager and tried to dodge responsibility for his mistakes, Lorraine would march him straight back to face the person he'd wronged and make him deliver a genuine apology while looking them in the eye. She had raised him with tough love, trying to build something solid and dependable out of him. But the truth was that Cole had always been fundamentally weak. He had no structural integrity whatsoever. The moment he left our home and met Vanessa, he had surrendered his spine without hesitation. He traded his strong, exacting mother for a controlling, manipulative wife who directed his every move. I knew with complete certainty that Cole was standing in some quiet corner of his house right now, reading from a script Vanessa had drilled into him just minutes before this call. He was a frightened puppet delivering his master's lines. He actually believed that dangling a vague, empty promise of future repayment would be enough to soothe my fury. He genuinely thought that floating a fictional reimbursement schedule for a $45,000 credit card charge would somehow blind me to the cold reality of what they had done. I knew I would never see a cent of that money from them. They lived well beyond their means, perpetually drowning in shallow debt to maintain a carefully curated image of wealth across their social media profiles. The notion that they would suddenly develop the financial discipline to pay back tens of thousands of dollars was laughable. But I didn't point out the gaping holes in his story. I didn't demand to see the therapist's supposed notes. I didn't raise my voice about the vicious disrespect of replacing my name with Trent's on a trip meant to honor my dead wife. Instead, I leaned smoothly into the lie they had built. I stripped every trace of anger, betrayal, and grief from my voice with deliberate care. I drew a slow breath and adopted the gentle, yielding tone of a sympathetic, thoroughly defeated old father who just wanted his son to be happy. "All right, son," I said quietly. Smooth, calm, completely non-threatening. "If Vanessa is truly dealing with such a serious medical issue, then of course she needs to be around her own people. Mental health matters enormously. I completely understand why you had to change the passenger details the way you did. Don't worry about me. I'll be perfectly fine here at the house. Just focus on taking care of your wife and making sure she gets the peaceful environment she needs." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the crushing weight of anxiety lifting clean off Cole's shoulders. The relief that flooded his voice was almost sickening. "Really, Dad, he asked, his tone flipping instantly from anxious desperation to barely contained excitement. "You're not furious with us. I mean, I know it's a massive change of plans, and I was genuinely terrified you'd lose it over the financial side of things." "I'm not mad at all, Cole," I said, a smooth, effortless lie. My face was a hard, expressionless mask. "A father's job is to support his son through difficult times. Go on your trip. Breathe the sea air. Enjoy every moment with the Harlow family. We can discuss the financial details and whatever repayment plan works whenever you're back in Portland. There's absolutely no rush." Thank you, Dad," Cole gushed, tumbling headfirst into the trap I had laid out for him. "You're the absolute best. Seriously, this means everything to Vanessa and me. We'll definitely bring you something special back from the glaciers. I have to go help Vanessa finish packing her therapy items, but I'll text you right before we board next. I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son," I replied, my voice steady. "Have a safe and memorable trip." I pulled the phone from my ear and ended the call. The screen went dark, and in the black glass I saw my own hard, unsmiling face staring back at me. Cole had swallowed the entire performance whole. He was probably walking back into his bedroom right now, flashing a triumphant smile at his manipulative wife, telling her the old man was handled and safely out of the way. They believed they had secured the ultimate prize, a flawless, completely free luxury vacation stretching out ahead of them. But they were catastrophically wrong. The real campaign hadn't even started yet, and my arrogant son had no idea he'd just handed me exactly the tactical leverage I needed to dismantle his carefully constructed, fraudulent little life. I sat in the silence of my study, fingers slowly steepled together, ready to begin the next phase. I sat in the silence of my study, fingers slowly steepled together, ready to begin the next phase. The heavy walnut clock on the wall ticked on steadily. Then the quiet shattered a sharp buzz from my phone on the desk, the screen flaring to life with a harsh white glow. I leaned forward and picked it up, half expecting another text from Cole, maybe a hollow follow-up or a supplementary lie to make sure I stayed pacified. Instead, the notification banner showed the familiar logo of my primary financial institution, an automated security alert. I frowned. I swiped the screen, unlocked the phone, and opened the banking app. The alert was linked to a specific checking account, one I rarely paid attention to because it was designed to stay completely dormant. It was a joint emergency checking account I shared with Cole. This account was a deeply sentimental remnant from a different chapter of our lives. Years ago, when Cole first left our family home to start college, my late wife, Lorraine, had firmly insisted we set up a shared financial safety net for him. Lorraine was a profoundly loving mother, but also intensely practical and fiercely protective. She wanted to guarantee that if our only son ever found himself in a genuine crisis, a sudden medical emergency, a major breakdown on the road, or a catastrophic living situation, he would have immediate, unquestioned access to liquid funds without waiting on banking hours or cross-country wire transfers. I had pushed back, at first convinced that a young man needed to wrestle with his own financial hardships to build real character. But Lorraine had fixed me with those steady, uncompromising eyes and quietly insisted that we give him a silent, permanent foundation of financial security. I deposited a generous sum into that account and largely put it out of my mind. Over the years that followed, even after Cole graduated, built a lucrative career, and eventually married Vanessa, I never got around to closing the account or removing his name from the authorized users. I simply kept a substantial cushion of cash sitting quietly in reserve, honoring the promise I had made to Lorraine to always provide our child a safe harbor. For years, the balance had sat completely untouched. Cole understood the strict terms of the arrangement. That money was reserved exclusively for genuine life-altering emergencies. I tapped the push notification and waited while the banking app loaded the transaction history for the joint account. The screen refreshed. My eyes locked on the bold figures at the top of the ledger. My heart dropped with a heavy thud. The available balance had been gutted. I scrolled quickly to the recent activity, my focus narrowing on the latest line items. There, in stark digital clarity, were 3 back-to-back cash withdrawals, each one for the exact same amount, $9,900. I stared at the screen, letting the cold arithmetic settle over me. 3 consecutive transactions of $9,900 executed within minutes of each other, a combined total of $29,700 in raw, untraceable cash, pulled directly from my private emergency reserves. The warmth drained out of me instantly. As a man who spent 40 years managing complex commercial construction budgets, handling massive union payrolls, and navigating corporate banking regulations, I knew precisely what that specific number meant. Nobody withdraws exactly $9,900 by accident. Under United States financial law, any single cash transaction of $10,000 or more automatically triggers a mandatory currency transaction report filed directly with the federal government, a strict legal requirement designed to detect and deter money laundering and illicit financial activity. By holding every withdrawal exactly $100 below that threshold, whoever had physically taken the money was engaging in a calculated illegal maneuver known as structuring. They were deliberately circumventing federal monitoring systems. They wanted to extract a life-changing amount of cash from the banking system without generating a single automated flag or prompting a security call to the primary account holder. This wasn't simply a stolen luxury vacation to Alaska. They were systematically draining my liquid reserves while feeding me an emotional sob story about Vanessa supposedly battling severe clinical depression. The sheer layered audacity of it was physically nauseating. Cole had just spent 10 minutes on the phone, practically begging for my paternal sympathy, painting his wife as a fragile, wounded woman who needed a peaceful family retreat just to function, while they had already orchestrated an illegal extraction of nearly $30,000 in untraceable cash. I set the phone down on the wooden desk, breathing evenly, but my mind running at a cold, hyper-vigilant speed. Why would a married couple living in a multi-million-dollar Lake Oswego estate need $30,000 in physical cash? You don't pay utility bills or luxury car insurance with unrecorded stacks of hundreds. You don't need carefully structured physical currency to enjoy a paid cruise where every amenity is tied to a digital cabin card. Untraceable cash serves only one purpose. It buys things that cannot legally leave a paper trail: illicit goods, shady, under-the-table arrangements, payments that must never appear in any record. My son was not merely a spineless coward who had let his wife disrespect his grieving father. He was now an active, brazen participant in a financial conspiracy aimed directly at my personal wealth. The pieces of the puzzle were locking into place with devastating precision. The abrupt removal of my name from the cruise booking. The replacement of my ticket with Vanessa's entire family. The carefully rehearsed manipulative phone call. And now the structured cash withdrawals from an account they clearly assumed I was too old and too oblivious to monitor. They had crossed a line there was no walking back from. I had to know exactly why. I had to know exactly why. I closed the banking app and pushed my chair back from the walnut desk. The morning air in the study felt suddenly thick, weighted with the reality of my son's betrayal. $29,700 in structured cash withdrawals was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate maneuver to bypass federal oversight executed by someone who urgently needed funds that left no trace. I needed to look Cole in the eye. I needed to see the truth on his face for myself. I got up, took my heavy canvas coat from the hallway closet, and stepped out the front door into the gray Portland morning. I got into my truck and turned the engine over. The drive from my neighborhood to the upscale streets of Lake Oswego normally ran about 30 minutes across the Marquam Bridge, but that morning, the distance felt like an eternity. The rhythmic thump of tires over the concrete expansion joints kept time with the hard drumming of my pulse. As I wound through the tree-lined streets of Lake Oswego, the modest homes fell away and gave way to sprawling multi-million-dollar estates. The neighborhood was a carefully maintained enclave of manicured lawns, pristine driveways, and towering evergreens, built for comfort, built for security. I turned and eased slowly toward the cul-de-sac where Cole and Vanessa lived. I didn't pull into their driveway. Decades of navigating deceitful contractors and hostile negotiations had sharpened an instinct in me: stay invisible until you know exactly what you're looking at. I drove past the property, parked the truck 2 full blocks away, and cut the engine. I sat for a moment in the silence, staring at my calloused hands on the wheel. Then I stepped out and walked down the sidewalk at an unhurried pace. The cold morning air bit at my face. I barely registered it. My attention was entirely fixed on the structure at the end of the street. A stunning modern architectural statement appraised at $2.2 million. I knew that figure exactly because I was the one who had bought it. When Cole and Vanessa first married, they had complained constantly about the punishing cost of living and their inability to afford a decent home in a safe neighborhood. I wanted to give my only son the foundation I'd had to fight for with my bare hands. I purchased the Lake Oswego property outright, entirely in cash. I didn't want them shackled to a 30-year mortgage or ground down by rising interest rates. But my business instincts held over pure parental feeling. I structured the ownership through a strict, revocable living trust. I kept the deed under my control while letting them live there completely rent-free. I even covered the annual property taxes and the homeowners association fees out of my own pocket. I gave them a flawless, comfortable existence with zero housing costs. All they had to do was maintain the property and build their lives. And now they were leveraging that absolute financial freedom to steal from me. I approached the edge of their property line, keeping close to the tall privacy hedges, carefully staying out of the sight line of the front door security camera. The bitter taste of their deception sat like ash at the back of my throat. I slipped through the side gate without a sound, my boots barely whispering against the damp paving stones. I gave the grand front entrance a wide berth and headed instead for the discreet side door that opened directly into the 3-car garage. My hand went to my coat pocket and came out with the heavy steel key ring. I found the silver master key without looking, a spare I'd kept back precisely for major maintenance emergencies, and pressed it into the deadbolt. One slow, practiced turn. The well-oiled mechanism gave way with the faintest click. I eased the heavy fireproof door open and stepped into the cavernous space beyond. I stayed still for a few seconds in the middle of the cold concrete floor, letting my eyes settle into the dim overhead light. The garage was immaculate, a monument to a lifestyle built entirely on someone else's labor and someone else's money. Vanessa's gleaming white luxury SUV sat beside Cole's imported sports car, both of them polished under the fluorescent lights. I had written the checks for both of those vehicles myself, calling them early inheritance gifts, genuinely believing I was giving them a stable foundation. Looking at them now, I saw only trophies. The air carried the faint scent of expensive leather polish and premium motor oil. I pulled the side door shut behind me and made sure the latch caught without a sound. The house above was not empty. Even through the thick insulated ceiling, the sounds came through plainly rapid footsteps crossing hardwood floors, the heavy thud of large objects hitting the ground, and voices. Their voices traveling down through the ventilation ducts. I moved toward the interior utility stairs, a narrow secondary staircase that climbed directly up to the rear hallway near the master suite. I took hold of the wooden railing and started up. Each boot came down on the very edge of the step. My weight shifted carefully to keep the wood from complaining. I rose into the residential level and folded myself into the shadows of the narrow back corridor. The sounds from the master bedroom were unmistakably clear now. They weren't packing in a grief-stricken daze, they were celebrating. Vanessa let out a sharp burst of genuine laughter, bright, unguarded, and utterly incompatible with the story of severe clinical depression she'd been selling me. I pressed my back against the cool, plastered wall and stood without moving. Through the partially open door of the master suite, I could see morning light falling across the imported Persian rugs. The distinct rhythmic zipping of heavily overstuffed luggage filled the air. They were hauling massive hard-shell designer cases across the floor, casually debating which formal outfits would be appropriate for the captain's dinner. My chest went cold with a fury I couldn't name. There was no medical emergency. There was no need for a gentle healing family retreat. They were packing for an extravagant luxury cruise, one they had cut directly from my grieving hands and claimed for themselves. I held my breath, narrowed everything down to pure listening, and let the full, horrifying shape of their betrayal take form in front of me. The master bedroom door sat cracked just far enough to throw a sliver of light across the expensive hardwood. I heard a heavy suitcase zipper dragged shut with force. Then Vanessa's voice came through. It bore no resemblance to the hushed, solicitous tone she'd used with me on the phone just hours before. This voice was loud, bright, and soaked through with arrogant triumph. She was mocking me. I could hear the sneer riding beneath every word as she imitated my calm surrender to her demands. Laughing about how effortless it had been to get the stupid old man to hand over a luxury vacation, she bragged that she'd barely had to push before I folded and gave her everything she wanted. My jaw tightened to stone. She was holding up my grief like a weakness she was proud to have found and exploited. A second voice joined from somewhere in the room, pulling a sharp, greedy laugh from Vanessa. It was Trent, Vanessa's perpetually unemployed brother, a man who appeared to have organized his entire life around the avoidance of honest work. He was somewhere in that room, probably sprawled across the bed my money had paid for. He wanted to know whether the boarding passes were printed. Then he announced that his singular ambition for the entire 10-day Alaskan voyage was to drain the ship of its finest alcohol, one bottle at a time. He told Vanessa to make sure the onboard spending account was still connected to my platinum credit card, and he described in vivid detail the premium bourbon and exclusive champagne he intended to order every night, joking that he'd drink enough to put me in a shallow financial grave. His exact words. He was savoring the thought of bleeding my finances dry aboard a vessel I had booked to honor my deceased wife's memory. The sheer weight of that disrespect pressed down on my chest like something physical. And as I stood there listening to Trent cheerfully map out his stolen luxury, my mind pulled me back all the way back through the decades. I thought about the bitter, freezing early mornings in Portland in the late 1970s, waking at 4 a.m. with a body that already ached from the day before. Lacing up my worn leather work boots in the dark, slipping out quietly so I wouldn't disturb a sleeping Lorraine or a young Cole. 40 years in knee-deep mud, pouring concrete foundations and dragging steel beams until the cartilage in my lower spine was ground to nothing. I destroyed my own back willingly for one single unwavering purpose. I wanted my son to never know the kind of struggle I had lived through. I wanted to raise walls so strong around him financially that the crushing anxiety of poverty couldn't find a way in. Lorraine and I had stripped every personal luxury from our own lives so that boy could have the world. And there he stood, my son, the sole product of all that sacrifice, silent in that room while his manipulative wife and her parasitic brother openly ridiculed the man who had given him everything he'd ever had. He was a coward. A spineless, hollow shadow of a man who couldn't find the basic moral courage to speak a single word in his father's defense. But the moment that pushed this beyond greed, the moment that turned it into something genuinely dark and sinister was still coming. The noise of the luggage zipper fell away. A short, heavy silence settled over the room. Then Cole spoke. His voice carried none of the laughter. It was tight and nervous, threaded through with a deep, cowardly reluctance. He didn't ask them to stop. Instead, he asked a question that turned the blood in my veins to ice. "Are you completely sure about the legal papers?" Cole asked, Vanessa's name slipping out in that same pathetic, fearful whisper, but landing clearly in the dark hallway where I stood. I could hear him shifting his weight against the floor. "I mean, doing this while we're out on the ocean, miles from everything, it feels like a massive risk. We're talking about fundamentally altering his entire life. He's not actually losing his memory, Vanessa. We both know he just misses Mom. He's just sad." The weight of those words hit me like something thrown at full force. Legal papers. Losing his memory. My breathing stopped altogether. I stood rigid in the cold shadows, my hands drawing into fists at my sides. Cole knew I was perfectly fine. He'd just said it himself, my mind was intact. My only affliction was grief. Yet he was questioning a legal strategy built on a fabricated medical premise. Vanessa gave him no comfort and no moral ground to stand on. She snapped at him with a voice so cutting and commanding, it made me physically flinch. She demanded to know whether he was prepared to simply wait around until I decided to revise my estate planning. She reminded him sharply that I held every legal right to alter the terms of the family trust at any moment I chose. She asked him coldly whether he was prepared to watch me donate the entire family fortune to some charitable foundation out of spite. Then she announced that her parents' personal physician had already put his signature on the preliminary evaluation documents. This corrupt, well-compensated doctor had committed to writing that I was currently displaying severe, unmistakable signs of advanced cognitive decline and early-onset Alzheimer's disease. That declaration shattered the last remnant of my paternal denial. The 3 recent bank withdrawals of $900 had nothing to do with luxury shopping or settling hidden credit card balances. That cash had been used to bribe a doctor and quietly purchase falsified psychiatric paperwork. They weren't just stealing a vacation. They were assembling a sophisticated illegal trap, one designed to strip me of my rights, seize my assets, and have me committed against my will. I stood motionless in that dark corridor, my heart beating out a slow, heavy rhythm of absolute unforgiving war as the full, terrifying truth settled over me. My own flesh and blood had signed the paperwork for his own complete and permanent financial destruction. The silence in the hallway was cut open by Vanessa's voice. She gave Cole's fleeting moral hesitation no room to breathe. She drove straight through it. "Do you honestly want to wait around until your senile father casually decides to change his mind?" The words came out like a blade drawn across still air. "Do you want to sit here patiently until he rewrites his entire will and leaves every cent to some random charity out of spite? We have already paid for the legal groundwork, Cole. My parents' personal physician has already officially signed the preliminary medical evaluation. The paperwork clearly states that Gerald is actively showing severe, undeniable signs of advanced Alzheimer's disease." I stopped breathing. The floor beneath my boots felt as though it was quietly dissolving. Alzheimer's. That single word hung in the air of a house I had built with my own sweat and sacrifice. There is no more insidious, more deliberately cruel lie a person can put into a legal document. My mind was razor sharp. I still managed my own investment portfolios and could recall in precise detail the morning I poured the concrete for the first commercial building I ever constructed. Yet my daughter-in-law was discussing a fabricated medical diagnosis with the casual detachment of someone running through a grocery list. Then it snapped into focus. The banking alerts from that morning. The 3 structured cash withdrawals of exactly $9,900 from our joint emergency account. I had assumed at first they were hiding purchases or paying off debts they didn't want traced. The real answer was far worse. That carefully structured $30,000 in cash had been used to bribe a corrupt doctor embedded in the Harlow family network. The remaining funds had gone under the table to whatever unethical attorney they'd brought in to draft the legal filings quietly without triggering any official scrutiny. They were funding my own legal and medical execution, using money I had spent decades setting aside to protect my son from genuine hardship. Cole's voice came back trembling with a cowardice that turned my stomach. What if the probate judge wants to question him directly? What if the court orders a secondary opinion from an independent neurologist? He is going to push back Vanessa. You know my dad. He doesn't fold when someone backs him into a corner, Vanessa responded, with a dismissive, arrogant scoff that rang down the narrow staircase. He is not going to have the chance to push back Cole, she said, her voice smooth and heavy with dark confidence. That is precisely why we are boarding that cruise tomorrow morning. While we are floating in the middle of the ocean, completely out of reach, completely removed, our attorney will file the petition for emergency guardianship with the county court. The judge will see the signed medical affidavit from a licensed physician. I pressed my shoulders into the cool plaster wall, eyes shut, listening, as she laid out the final devastating phase of her plan with the composure of someone who had rehearsed it many times. And when the court asks for evidence of recent erratic behavior, Vanessa went on, her tone practically vibrating with satisfaction. We will present the simple, undeniable fact that he voluntarily abandoned his own expensive family vacation at the last possible moment. We'll argue that his mental state has deteriorated to the point where he is a danger to himself, suddenly isolating, refusing to leave his empty house, cutting himself off from his loving family. It is the perfect narrative. By the time our cruise docks back in Portland next week, the emergency court order will already be fully processed. We'll have the medical transport team standing quietly at his front door. He'll be transitioned into a secure memory care facility for his own protection, and we will assume full legal control over the entire revocable trust. This $2.2 million house, the investment portfolios, every liquid cash account, all of it will finally belong to us. The calculated perfection of the trap was genuinely breathtaking. They had weaponized my grief over Lorraine's death to paint me as an unstable, reclusive old man. They had manipulated me into skipping the cruise, then transformed that quiet, dignified decision into the final manufactured piece of evidence they needed to strip away my legal rights. Had I simply stayed home unaware of any of this, I would have opened my door next week to medical orderlies ready to carry me out and lock me away for whatever remained of my life. They were willing to bury me alive to accelerate their inheritance. My chest stopped aching. The suffocating grief that had sat on my heart since I first read Cole's text at 6:00 in the morning dissolved completely and without a trace. There was no paternal love remaining in my body. The man standing in that master bedroom was no longer my son. He was a dangerous, compromised liability, an active, willing participant in a carefully constructed conspiracy to take my freedom, my dignity, and everything I had spent a lifetime building. I had heard everything I needed to hear. I eased myself away from the wall, making sure the fabric of my heavy canvas coat didn't graze the wooden doorframe. I set each boot down on the precise edge of the stairs and reversed my path silently back down into the dim garage. My breathing was slow and deep and entirely controlled. A cold, focused surge of energy moved through me, the same sensation I used to feel when I walked onto a chaotic, failing construction site, and understood immediately that I needed to dismiss the entire management crew and rebuild from the ground up. I slipped out the side garage door into the cold morning air and walked the 2 long blocks back to my truck with long, deliberate strides. I climbed into the driver's seat and took hold of the heavy leather steering wheel. The time for grief was finished. They had declared war, and I was going to deliver a financial and legal reckoning so thoroughly devastating that the Harlow name would carry the damage permanently. The drive back across the Marquam Bridge was a wash of gray concrete and heavy rain. My truck's tires hummed against the wet asphalt in a steady, flat rhythm that matched the cold precision taking shape in my mind. I didn't head back to my empty house. I drove straight into the heart of downtown Portland. Glass and steel towers rose on either side as I worked through the slick, crowded streets. I pulled into the underground garage of a high-rise office building, shut the engine off, and drew one long, final breath. The raw sting of betrayal had burned itself out, entirely replaced by something colder and far more focused. I was no longer a grieving widower. I was no longer a forgiving father. I was a man fighting for his own survival. I stepped off the elevator on the 42nd floor and walked with purpose through the heavy glass doors of Paxton, Farrow and Lund, one of the most ruthless and highly regarded corporate law firms in the entire Pacific Northwest. The receptionist, a sharply dressed young woman who had known me for well over a decade, read my expression the moment I came through the door. She didn't ask whether I had an appointment. She gave a single quick nod, lifted her desk phone, and pressed one button. Within seconds, the heavy walnut door at the far end of the corridor swung open. Conrad Paxton filled the frame. Conrad was 68 years old, a legal shark whose tailored Italian suits barely contained the instincts of a courtroom predator. He had been my personal attorney, my trusted confidant, and my closest friend for more than 35 years, the man who had drafted every ironclad contract, protecting my construction business from the full range of corporate threats it had ever faced. Conrad took one look at how I was standing, stepped back, and silently brought me into his expansive corner office. He shut the heavy door behind us and made sure the lock engaged. The room was built for intimidation, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a sweeping view of the dark, churning waters of the Willamette River. He didn't offer me anything to drink or make small talk about my morning. He crossed directly to his massive oak desk, settled into his high-backed leather chair, and fixed his piercing gray eyes on me. "You've got that exact same look on your face you had 20 years ago, when you cleaned house on your entire executive board," Conrad said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Tell me exactly who we are legally destroying today." I sat down in the chair across from him. No emotional preamble, no long wind-up. I gave him the facts, stripped bare. I laid out the early morning text from Cole canceling the cruise. I walked him through the 3 structured cash withdrawals of exactly $9,900 drawn from the joint emergency checking account. And then I told him about my silent visit to the Lake Oswego mansion, repeating word for word the conversation I had stood in the dark hallway and listened to between Vanessa and my son. I described their plan to illegally obtain a fraudulent medical diagnosis of advanced Alzheimer's disease. I detailed their timeline to have me declared legally incompetent and removed to a secured facility while they enjoyed a luxury cruise paid for with my own platinum credit card. Conrad didn't interrupt once. He sat perfectly still, hands steepled, his expression darkening and sharpening with each sentence. When I finished, a heavy silence settled over the office. He slowly lowered his hands and released a long, controlled breath. "I warned you about this, Gerald," he said, his tone stripped of judgment, loaded instead with a cold, professional fury. 7 years ago, when you insisted on buying that expensive Lake Oswego property outright and placing it into a revocable living trust for Cole to use, I warned you. I sat in this same chair and told you that putting massive, unrestricted assets under the control of a weak young man with a highly manipulative wife was a recipe for financial catastrophe. I told you they would eventually read your generosity as a permanent vulnerability. You were absolutely right, Conrad, I replied, holding his gaze. I let my grief over Lorraine cloud my judgment completely. I wanted to give him a beautiful, worry-free life. But I'm not here to go over my failures as a father. I'm here because my son and his wife are actively trying to have me legally buried while I'm still breathing. I need to know exactly how far along this process is. I need to understand the specific mechanics of what they've built. Conrad said nothing more. He swiveled his chair toward his multi-monitor computer setup, and his fingers moved across the keyboard with fast, practiced aggression. As a senior partner at a major firm, he had specialized access to the secure digital dockets of the county superior court system, bypassing the public-facing portals and going straight into the restricted back-end filing networks where attorneys queue up forthcoming petitions before a judge ever stamps them. The soft, rapid percussion of his typing was the only sound in the room for several long minutes. I watched his eyes move quickly across the dense lines of legal text filling his monitors. Then his fingers went still. His jaw tightened, and a dark, dangerous expression moved across his face. He reached for the mouse and opened a single file. He turned the large monitor around to face me. The screen threw pale light across the walnut desk. I leaned in, eyes locking onto the stark, formal header at the top of the document. It was an official petition for emergency guardianship and declaration of complete incapacity. The primary petitioner listed was Cole Whitaker. The targeted respondent was Gerald Whitaker. Conrad pressed a finger toward the screen, his voice controlled but tight, with barely contained anger. They didn't just talk about it, Gerald. They paid a corrupt, unethical attorney to draft the full execution order. It's weaponized and sitting live in the secure filing queue. Look at the attached exhibits. They've already uploaded a preliminary medical affidavit heavily implying severe advanced cognitive decline, signed by a physician with zero connection to your actual medical history. They've documented your recent grief-driven isolation as evidence of serious mental instability. And look at the scheduled filing date. He tapped the bottom of the screen. Next Tuesday, exactly 48 hours after their cruise ship sailed beyond international communication range. I stared at the glowing document, reading the cold, clinical language designed to strip away my rights, seize my financial legacy, and remove me from the world entirely. They planned to drop this irreversible legal bomb on a sympathetic probate judge while they were on a private ocean balcony drinking champagne, a balcony I had personally paid for. They expected to step off that ship and casually collect my fortune while I deteriorated in a locked, sterile room. Conrad turned the monitor back around and met my eyes, his own burning with a fierce, protective anger. They've loaded the gun, Gerald, and they've pointed it straight at your head. If we don't dismantle this right now, you will lose your freedom before the week is out. They think they are dealing with a helpless old man. I rose slowly from the chair and buttoned my heavy canvas coat. I looked out at the dark water through the wide windows. I felt absolutely nothing for the boy I had raised. The betrayal was total, absolute, and beyond any forgiveness. I turned back to my oldest friend, my voice dropping to a cold, quiet whisper. They are not dealing with a helpless old man, Conrad. They are dealing with the architect who built their entire world. And today, we are going to tear their miserable house down to the studs. Show me exactly how we financially slaughter them. Conrad leaned forward, forearms resting on the walnut desk. The hard intensity in his eyes was a perfect reflection of the cold fire moving through me. He offered no generic legal reassurances. He shifted directly into the tactical mode that had made him the most feared trust attorney in the city. A direct confrontation, he explained, would be a serious strategic mistake. If I walked into that Lake Oswego mansion and demanded answers, Cole and Vanessa would know immediately that their plan had been exposed. They would reach their corrupt attorney scramble to bury the financial trail and potentially try to accelerate the guardianship petition through emergency psychiatric holds. We had to move in complete secrecy. We were going to let them finish packing their designer luggage. We were going to let them board that cruise ship tomorrow morning, fully convinced their trap was perfectly set. And while they floated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, sipping expensive champagne on my dime, we were going to systematically dismantle their entire financial existence. Before I tell you what I did next, and what it would ultimately cost the people who believed they had already won, let me ask you this. If someone you had given everything to was quietly working to take the rest, would you confront them the moment you found out? Or would you wait and build something they could never undo? The very first move in our counteroffensive was the Lake Oswego estate. When I originally bought that $2.2 million property for Cole, I had structured the ownership through a revocable living trust. At the time, Cole and Vanessa had been mildly irritated by the complexity of the arrangement, assuming it was little more than a bureaucratic inconvenience. What they entirely failed to grasp was the absolute power that specific legal designation left in my hands. As the sole creator and primary grantor of a revocable trust, I held the unquestionable authority to alter, amend, or dissolve the entire legal entity at any moment I chose. I didn't need Cole's signature. I didn't need Vanessa's consent. I had no legal obligation to even notify them that the status of their primary residence was being permanently changed. The house was in essence a very expensive conditional gift, one I could pull back the instant they showed themselves to be unworthy. They had just shown themselves to be actively dangerous. Conrad drew a thick stack of legal paper from his drawer and slid a gold pen across the desk toward me. He began drafting a formal notice of trust revocation, his sharp legal mind working quickly through the precise terminology needed to sever the property from the trust immediately. The document stated plainly that the original trust agreement was now null and void. The entire $2.2 million Lake Oswego property, along with all associated physical assets and underlying equity, was reverting immediately back to my name alone. I picked up the pen and held it over the paper for a brief moment. A ghost of a memory drifted through a much younger Cole on my shoulders, the two of us standing over the freshly poured concrete of his first childhood home. But that boy was gone, replaced entirely by a treacherous stranger who had agreed to have me committed to a medical facility. I gripped the pen and signed my full legal name in long, deliberate strokes. Conrad took the document, pressed his notary stamp firmly onto the bottom of the page with a loud final click, and handed it immediately to his senior paralegal, a composed, highly efficient woman who had entered the office without a word. He instructed her to walk the documents personally to the county recorder's office and file them before the afternoon deadline. With that single signature, Cole and Vanessa were stripped of their most valuable asset. They were no longer the privileged residents of a multi-million-dollar estate. They were now simply unauthorized occupants living inside a house owned entirely by the man they were plotting to destroy. The financial slaughter had only just started. We moved immediately to the second phase, the joint emergency checking account, the very account they had used to structure those illegal $30,000 in cash withdrawals. I pulled my smartphone from my coat pocket, set it flat on the desk between us, and opened my secure mobile banking application. I navigated to the emergency account ledger. The screen showed a remaining balance of just over $400,000. That was money Lorraine and I had built up over decades of hard physical labor. It existed to protect our family from genuine hardship, not to bankroll a corrupt medical conspiracy. Conrad pulled his chair closer and fixed his eyes on the screen. As my legal counsel, he needed to witness the transaction in full to ensure there could be no future claim of improper asset handling. I tapped the transfer icon. I selected the joint emergency account as the funding source. Then I selected a private, fully secured solo account I had kept entirely separate from the family trust. I typed in the exact numerical value, every last penny. I left them nothing for utilities, nothing for insurance premiums, not a single dollar as a cushion. I held my finger over the green confirmation button for one final second. I thought about Vanessa laughing in that sunlit bedroom, mocking my grief without a trace of shame. I thought about the corrupt physician who had put his name on a document designed to legally erase my freedom. And I thought about Cole, my own flesh and blood, standing silent while it all happened. I pressed the button. The screen refreshed instantly. The joint emergency account balance fell from over $400,000 to zero. The entire sum moved in a single transaction into my impenetrable solo account. Conrad leaned back in his leather chair, a look of deep professional satisfaction settling across his face. He brought his hands together once in a single quiet clap, the sound crisp in the stillness of the room. You've officially cut their primary financial lifeline, Gerald," he said, his voice calm and measured. "The house is yours. The cash is yours. By the time they board that ship tomorrow morning, they'll be operating on financial fumes without the slightest idea. But there is still one critical task remaining before they sail. We have to neutralize the pending court petition before their attorney can officially file it next Tuesday." I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket. The burning in my chest had given way to something colder and more absolute, a deep, quiet freeze. I looked straight at Conrad, jaw set. "We're not just going to neutralize their petition, Conrad. We're going to reverse it and use it to bury them. Tell me exactly what to do." Conrad's eyes narrowed, a predatory gleam cutting through the gray light of the office. He steepled his fingers again and began laying out the standard defensive strategy, filing an emergency counter-injunction, alerting the court preemptively to the fraudulent medical paperwork, dragging them through years of expensive litigation until they ran dry. I shook my head slowly. A prolonged courtroom fight was far too comfortable for what they had planned for me. I didn't want them to have time on their side, or money for defense attorneys, or the simple relief of sleeping in a warm house while the legal process ground along. I wanted total, immediate financial annihilation. I wanted them to walk off that cruise ship and find their entire world gone. "No, we're going to sell the Lake Oswego mansion," I said flatly, the words landing on the polished desk like stones. "Not next month. Not next week. Before they've had the chance to order their first drink on that ship." Conrad paused, momentarily caught off guard by the sheer aggression of it. He recovered quickly, his legal mind already working through the logistics. He pointed out that standard real estate transactions take 30 to 60 days to close. They would be back from the cruise long before the property changed hands through conventional channels. I wasn't talking about a conventional transaction. Over 40 years in commercial construction, I had crossed paths with every variety of property investor in the greater Portland area. I knew exactly who to call when a major asset needed to disappear from the ledger fast. There is a specific, highly profitable subculture inside the real estate market, built entirely around corporate cash flippers, massive, well-funded investment groups that specialize in acquiring motivated or distressed properties at a steep discount. They operate completely outside the traditional banking system, buying properties sight unseen with deep reserves of liquid capital, closing large deals within days, and skipping the drawn-out process of appraisals and inspection contingencies entirely. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and scrolled past Cole's contact. I stopped on a name I hadn't dialed in nearly a decade: Dex Fontaine. Dex was a ruthless, highly efficient corporate real estate operator who ran the largest cash-flipping syndicate on the West Coast. He and I had closed several profitable, quietly executed deals years back when I was liquidating old commercial warehouse properties. Dex operated by two principles only: speed and margin. I pressed call and set the phone on speaker in the center of Conrad's desk. 2 rings, then a sharp, gravelly voice came through. "Gerald Whitaker." Dex boomed his tone, carrying genuine surprise. "I thought you retired and moved yourself onto a golf course." "Wanted to do it." "What does a retired construction kingpin need from a guy like me on a damp Thursday afternoon?" I need to liquidate a premium residential asset, Dex," I replied, my voice carrying no warmth or preamble. "And I need it closed faster than anything you've ever done in your career." The easy tone evaporated from Dex's voice, instantly replaced by the cold, calculating edge of a man who had just caught the scent of serious money. "Define your timeline, Gerald. What are we actually looking at?" "Chicocaine. I have a pristine, modern architectural estate on a premium double lot in a highly exclusive Lake Oswego cul-de-sac." I said, each word measured and deliberate. "Current market appraisal puts it at exactly $2.2 million. I hold the unencumbered deed in my personal name, 0 liens, 0 outstanding mortgages, no legal encumbrances of any kind. The title is perfectly clean." I let that sit for a moment. I knew Dex was already running neighborhood comparables in his head. "I'll sell you the entire estate at a flat 20% discount." I continued, dropping the bait. 1.76 million cash, but with 2 absolute non-negotiable conditions. First, we close the full transaction and record the deed transfer in exactly 3 days. No inspections, no appraisals, no financing delays. Pure liquid cash wired directly into my attorney's escrow account. By Monday morning, a low whistle came through the speaker. A straight 20% discount on a pristine Lake Oswego mansion was the kind of margin cash flippers spent years chasing. Dex didn't pause. "If the title is as clean as you're telling me, Gerald, my corporate attorneys can have the full sum wired by Monday at 9 in the morning. What's the second condition?" This was the strike. This was the mechanism that would gut Cole and Vanessa's comfortable world at the foundation. "The property must be purchased strictly as is, Dex," I said, my voice dropping lower. "And when I say as is, I mean the absolute entirety of its current physical contents. Every piece of custom imported furniture, every expensive television, every designer garment hanging in the walk-in closets, every piece of jewelry sitting in the drawers, every digital device scattered across the counters. You buy the house, you take full legal ownership of everything inside those walls. I want your clean-out crews waiting in the driveway Tuesday morning. Everything left inside gets hauled directly to an industrial dumpster. Keep what you can sell and destroy the rest." A heavy silence settled over the line. Even a hardened operator like Dex was briefly stopped by the sheer ferocity of the demand. But a deal was a deal, and the margin was impossible to walk away from. "Heck, you are a genuinely terrifying man when you're motivated, Gerald," Dex finally said, a dark chuckle threading through his voice. "You've got yourself a deal. Send the legal address and the title documents to my acquisition team. We'll start drafting the binding purchase agreement right now." I ended the call and looked across the polished desk at Conrad. My seasoned attorney stared back at me with an expression of quiet, profound admiration. He didn't need to say anything. The trap was set and moving. Conrad leaned back in his leather chair and let out a slow whistle. Liquidating a multi-million-dollar estate in 72 hours through a corporate cash syndicate was an absolute masterstroke. I thanked him for the rapid legal execution, stood up, and shook his hand firmly. We had knocked out the primary financial foundation, but the real psychological warfare was only just beginning. I walked out of the downtown high-rise and stepped back onto the wet Portland pavement. The rain had let up, leaving the city streets slick and gray under the afternoon light. I climbed into my truck and ignored the damp chill working through my canvas coat. I rested my hands on the wheel for a moment, letting the full weight of what we'd accomplished settle over me. Cole and Vanessa were somewhere across town right now, packing their designer luggage, entirely convinced they had outmaneuvered a grieving and helpless old man. They believed their legal petition was safely queued and ready to erase my existence. They were cheerfully preparing to board a luxury cruise I had planned and paid for in full. They assumed I was home weeping over old photographs, my mind quietly unraveling. Instead, I had just sold the house from underneath them. But taking the house and draining the emergency account wasn't enough on its own. I wanted them to feel it viscerally, completely the same terrifying helplessness they had mapped out so casually for me. I didn't want them to discover they were broke and homeless while standing safely on familiar ground. I wanted them trapped. I wanted them isolated in international waters, surrounded by opulent luxury they could suddenly no longer touch. I pulled out my phone, opened the contacts, and went directly to the saved reservation file for the upcoming Alaskan voyage. I tapped the primary customer service number for the Royal Caribbean Executive Booking Desk. The call connected and moved through a short automated menu and placed me on a brief hold before a cheerful professional voice came on the line, greeting me by name and thanking me warmly for my premium loyalty status. The representative asked how she could assist with my upcoming embarkation for the owner's suite. I kept my voice smooth and unhurried, giving nothing away. I provided my booking reference number, my personal identification details, and the primary billing zip code to confirm my authorized status on the account. She verified my identity and offered to arrange last-minute shore excursions or upgrade our dining package. I declined politely. I told her I needed to make a specific, immediate administrative adjustment to the primary passenger folio. A sudden personal matter had come up, I explained, and I would not be boarding the vessel tomorrow morning. She offered her practiced condolences and began moving toward cancellation and refund procedures. I cut in before she got far. I was not canceling the tickets. The remaining passengers on the folio, Cole Whitaker, Vanessa Whitaker, and Trent Harlow, were absolutely still planning to board and complete the scheduled Alaskan itinerary. Their boarding passes were to remain fully active and valid. She paused briefly, mildly puzzled, but confirmed that secondary passengers could certainly proceed without me. That was exactly what I needed confirmed. Then I delivered the final blow. I instructed her to immediately and permanently remove my primary platinum credit card from the central onboard spending account. I was severing all financial responsibility for the remaining passengers entirely. I needed my card disconnected from their individual cabin keys, their digital folios, and every associated onboard credit line. A brief silence followed on her end. She was almost certainly reading through the extensive list of premium beverage packages, luxury spa bookings, and specialty dining reservations already charged to that card. She informed me carefully that removing the card would void all of those arrangements on the spot. I told her that was precisely my intention. I reiterated clearly that Cole, Vanessa, and Trent were now fully responsible for presenting their own independent payment method at the embarkation terminal. If they wanted premium alcohol access, high-speed satellite internet, or any of the exclusive shore excursions, they would need to hand their own credit cards to the ship's purser. I held the line while she typed officially, executing every instruction I had given. She read back a formal disclosure confirming that my financial liability was terminated and that the remaining passengers would be met with a zero-balance folio at boarding. I thanked her and ended the call. I set the phone down on the passenger seat. A cold, quiet smirk settled across my face, the first one in a very long time. The trap was complete. The snare was perfectly set, and the bait was far too magnificent for them to ever think of refusing. Come morning, the three of them would wake up, wrestle their bloated designer luggage into a premium rideshare, and make their eager way down to the bustling Portland cruise terminal. They'd scan their boarding passes without a hitch stroll onto that enormous floating palace, and make a beeline for the nearest upscale bar to toast what they believed was their triumph. Trent would confidently order the most expensive vintage bourbon on the menu. Vanessa would loudly demand a bottle of exclusive imported champagne, and Cole would slide his C-Pass card across the bar with a smug little flourish, fully expecting my unlimited platinum account to absorb the damage without a ripple. The humiliation that was about to hit them would be genuinely spectacular. Three people standing in the middle of a crowded luxury lounge, cut off from my money, forced to frantically drain their own badly depleted accounts just to get a basic internet connection. They'd be physically stuck on that massive ship in the middle of a freezing ocean for 10 long and grinding days, slowly coming to understand that the financial pipeline they'd been drinking from had run completely dry. And while they were scrambling to cover their own extravagant bar tab, Dex Fontaine and his aggressive corporate demolition crew would be hurling every last piece of their pretentious lifestyle into a rusted steel dumpster. I smiled. The next morning broke with the crisp, damp chill that belongs to early spring in the Pacific Northwest. I'd been up well before dawn, nursing a black tea in my kitchen, working methodically through the timeline. By 8 a.m., I was parked in an elevated lot with a clear view of the bustling terminal at the port of Portland. The ship's massive, brilliant white hull dominated the waterfront, already preparing to depart for Alaska. The terminal below was pure, organized chaos. Taxis and shuttle buses cycled in and out of the unloading zones in a constant stream, discharging hundreds of eager passengers. I sat easy in my truck, a pair of compact field binoculars resting on the console. I didn't need them yet. I knew precisely when they would show up. Cole was aggressively punctual whenever his own comfort was on the line. Right on cue, a sleek black SUV glided up to the VIP drop-off lane. The driver stepped out and pulled the rear doors open. My pulse held a slow, mechanical rhythm as I watched Cole climb out onto the pavement dressed in expensive nautical resort wear, wearing the look of a man without a single care in the world. Vanessa followed a step behind him, face tucked behind oversized designer sunglasses, dramatically waving the driver toward her mountain of luggage. Then came Trent, practically bouncing out of the vehicle in a brightly colored tropical shirt that looked profoundly ridiculous in the cold Portland rain. They stood together on the pavement, laughing loud and loose, wrapped entirely in their unearned arrogance. They handed their bags off to the waiting porters, fully expecting my premium loyalty status to pave every inch of their VIP embarkation. I picked up my tablet from the passenger seat and opened the social media app. Months earlier, I'd set up an anonymous profile to track family updates that Cole routinely forgot to share. I went straight to Vanessa's public feed. She had just posted a heavily filtered photograph of the three of them posed proudly in front of the ship. The caption read, "Embarking on our much-needed, incredibly hard-earned luxury vacation. Time to leave all the stress behind and completely pamper ourselves." A champagne glass emoji capped the whole absurd statement. Incredibly hard-earned. The depth of delusion required to type those words after bankrolling a corrupt medical trap with stolen money was staggering. They genuinely believed they had outmaneuvered me, They were convinced the hardest part of their scheme was already behind them, utterly blind to the fact that they were strolling straight into a flawless, inescapable financial cage. I watched through the windshield as they casually pushed through the heavy glass doors of the main terminal and vanished into the VIP security queue. They'd be fast-tracked directly onto the ship, bypassing the long lines of regular passengers. I knew the exact layout of that vessel. I knew they'd head straight for the exclusive upper decks, expecting their premium welcome packages to be waiting. I stayed in my truck for another 2 hours, patiently watching the continuous flow of passengers board. Eventually, the massive loading ramps were hauled back. The heavy mooring lines were systematically freed from the concrete pylons. A deep, resonant vibration rolled through the damp air and pressed against the windows of my truck as the ship's engines rumbled to life. Then the enormous booming blast of the ship's horn rang out across the waterfront, a triumphant, declarative sound. The colossal white vessel began its slow, smooth departure from the dock, churning the dark waters of the Willamette River into thick white foam. I watched the ship complete its turn and point its bow toward open water. They were on their way. Within a few hours, standard terrestrial cell service would be gone entirely. They would be wholly dependent on the ship's ruinously expensive satellite internet, a premium service they no longer had the financial means to access. Perfectly isolated, suspended in international waters, completely cut off from their corrupt attorneys and the heavily mortgaged reality waiting for them back on dry land. I dropped the truck into gear and pulled away from the waterfront, heading straight for the downtown financial district. Conrad Paxton was already waiting in the executive boardroom of his firm. Seated across from him was Dex Fontaine, flanked by 2 of his own hard-edged corporate attorneys. The atmosphere in that room was strictly coldly transactional. No pleasantries. No small talk about the weather. We were there to execute a highly profitable and profoundly devastating corporate liquidation. Dex had a thick stack of finalized closing documents laid neatly on the polished table. His legal team had fully verified the unencumbered status of the Lake Oswego estate. They knew they were locking in an exceptionally valuable asset at a 20% discount, and they were eager to close before I had any chance to reconsider. I settled into my chair and picked up the heavy gold-plated pen Conrad had set out specifically for the occasion. I read through the binding clauses carefully. The language was crystal clear and entirely without mercy. The sale was strictly as is. The buyer assumed complete ownership of the physical property and the totality of its current contents. Dex's demolition crews were formally authorized to breach the property and begin total liquidation at 8 Surroulers the following morning. I set the pen to the paper and signed my legal name on the final line. I slid the executed documents across to Dex. He checked the signatures, gave a sharp nod to his lead attorney, and smoothly produced a secure digital authentication token from his jacket pocket. He keyed in a numerical sequence authorizing the immediate release of the funds. We sat in complete silence and waited. Fewer than 3 minutes later, my phone lit up on the table. A high-priority encrypted alert from my primary bank. I picked it up and opened the message. The notification was brief, clean, and absolute. An incoming federal wire transfer of $1.76 million had successfully cleared and was now permanently settled in my private, impenetrable solo account. The money was secured. The transaction was irreversible. Dex stood, shook my hand firmly, and walked briskly out of the room with his legal team to dispatch his property extraction crews. I remained standing alone in the silent boardroom with Conrad. The massive Lake Oswego mansion, the physical embodiment of all their arrogant pride, no longer belonged to my son. Their expensive cars, their designer wardrobes, every stick of furniture they had ever claimed as their own, were about to be pitched into a commercial dumpster. The financial slaughter was executed without a flaw, and my treacherous son was completely trapped on a floating island, utterly powerless to stop any of it. I settled into the quiet comfort of my living room, the glowing embers in the fireplace casting a warm, shifting light across the hardwood floor. A steaming cup of black tea sat on the table beside me. The house was completely still, free of the suffocating grief that had weighed on it just days before. Hundreds of miles away, swallowed by the vast, freezing expanse of the northern Pacific, my son and his treacherous wife were now confronting the absolute, undeniable reality of everything they had done. The luxury cruise industry runs on a very specific, entirely cashless model. The moment a passenger steps on board, physical currency becomes worthless. Every transaction, premium dining, luxury spa treatments, satellite internet, top-shelf alcohol, is processed exclusively through a shipboard account card, known as a CPAS card. That card had to be backed by a valid active credit account. I had cut that financial lifeline completely. I knew it would take a few hours for the ship to reach international waters and sync its internal billing network. Right on schedule, my phone began buzzing on the coffee table. They were entirely cut off from standard cell towers, forced to lean on the ship's highly restricted, barely functional emergency satellite network to place outgoing calls. The connection was dreadful, thick with crackling static, but the frantic audio messages they left on my voicemail were remarkably clear in their panic. I took a slow sip of my tea, settled back into my leather armchair, and tapped the screen to play the first recorded message. Cole's voice filled the quiet room. He did not sound like the smug, calculating man who had coolly signed documents to strip away my freedom. He sounded utterly terrified, his breathing shallow and rapid. He stumbled through an explanation of a massive, deeply humiliating scene that had just erupted at the ship's primary luxury lounge. Vanessa had swept up to the premium bar with her entire arrogant entourage and loudly ordered a $500 bottle of exclusive vintage champagne to kick off their lavish vacation in style. The bartender took her cabin card, ran it through the terminal, and calmly informed her that the transaction had been declined. Cole lurched through the voicemail, painting a vivid picture of the excruciating mortification of that moment. Vanessa had gone after the bartender, aggressively making an enormous, ear-splitting scene in front of dozens of wealthy passengers. She demanded the card be run again, declaring with complete arrogance that the account carried a limitless platinum credit line. The bartender tried several more times before escalating to the head purser, who informed them in clipped, cold terms that the primary funding source had been explicitly and permanently revoked by the account holder. Cole practically begged me to call the cruise line and sort out what he insisted was a simple administrative banking error. He pleaded that Vanessa's parents were absolutely furious and mortified by the public spectacle. I let the first message end and tapped the screen for the second. This one had been left exactly 40 minutes later. Whatever confusion had colored Cole's voice the first time was entirely gone, replaced by raw, suffocating panic. He had gone straight to the guest services desk to buy a premium satellite internet package so he could get into his mobile banking app and wire funds to salvage what was left of their dignity. The premium internet connection ran exactly $100 per day. Cole had confidently handed the purser his physical debit card, the one tied directly to our joint emergency checking account, the very same account they had used to illegally pay off a corrupt doctor. His voice cracked with desperation as he told me the debit card was declined for severely insufficient funds. He was completely unraveling, loudly demanding to understand how a bank account that had held over $400,000 in liquid cash could possibly be showing a flat zero balance. He begged me to pick up the phone. He pleaded with me to contact the bank and report a catastrophic fraud. He actually had the sheer audacity to ask me to protect the very money he had methodically planned to use for my permanent legal destruction. I listened to his crumbling voice and felt a deep, cold wave of calculated satisfaction wash over me. They were finally grasping the full, terrifying dimensions of their situation. They were physically locked inside a massive floating steel vessel in the middle of a freezing ocean. No active credit cards. Zero accessible cash. No way to generate a single liquid dollar. The third and final voicemail was the most telling of all. And it wasn't Cole. It was Vanessa. Every trace of the thick, imperious superiority she had worn in the Lake Oswego mansion was completely gone. She was practically weeping into the receiver. She sobbed that her entire family had turned on her. Trent, her parasitic brother, was throwing a full explosive meltdown in the corridor because he couldn't get a single drink. He had eagerly made his way to the poolside bar to launch his 10-day binge, only to be flatly told his cabin card was financially locked. Vanessa cried that they had been officially turned away from every premium specialty restaurant on the ship. With no valid payment method to their name, they were now confined to the massive crowded complimentary buffet alongside the thousands of ordinary economy passengers they had always looked down on. She wailed about the sheer indignity of queuing up in a long line for a basic plate of free pasta. She described in painful detail the scorching, judgmental stares from her parents who had expected a seamless, fully pampered luxury experience on my account. Instead, they were stuck in a cramped standard economy cabin, seething over premium reservations that had been wiped out entirely. Vanessa begged me to restore the accounts, promising to apologize for whatever minor offense she claimed to have committed. She still genuinely thought this was a petty, temporary punishment for some small disagreement. She had absolutely no idea that while she was sobbing over a declined champagne bottle and a canceled dinner reservation, my contacts were busy finalizing the complete and total demolition of her entire life back on dry land. I deleted all 3 voicemails, permanently erasing their desperate, pleading voices from my server. I set my phone back on the solid wooden table and took another long, deeply satisfying sip of hot tea. Let them eat from the free buffet line. Let them endure the merciless fury of her humiliated, self-important family. Let them spend the next 10 days marooned on that ship, slowly unraveling into complete financial madness. They had earned every single agonizing second of this exquisite, flawless nautical nightmare. Their precious vacation had officially become a floating prison. The next morning arrived bright and clear, a sharp contrast to the heavy gray skies that had matched my grief just days before. The air felt crisp and almost invigorating as I drove across the bridge toward the well-manicured streets of Lake Oswego. I parked down the road from the estate that no longer carried my son's name. I walked to a coffee shop on the corner, ordered a black roast, and made my way back toward the property. I took up a position on the public sidewalk directly across the quiet, tree-lined street. The neighborhood was peaceful, automated sprinklers ticking softly, distant landscaping crews humming in the background, a portrait of suburban calm that had no idea what was about to unfold on its doorstep. I stood there warming my cold hands around the paper cup, studying the architectural face of the house I had bought, with every good intention a parent could have. At exactly 7:45 in the morning, the heavy groan of diesel engines tore through the silence. 2 massive roll-off dumpsters were reversed down the wide, stamped concrete driveway. Their heavy steel wheels carved deep, graceless grooves into the immaculate landscaping Vanessa had loudly insisted I fund just the previous spring. 3 large box trucks followed, pulling up along the curb. 12 burly, efficient men in work boots climbed out. Dex Fontaine had kept every word of his promise. These were seasoned property extraction specialists, men who had done this kind of corporate liquidation many times before. They moved with a cold, mechanical precision that was genuinely unsettling to watch. The crew foreman, a large man gripping a heavy steel pry bar and a clipboard, walked straight to the front door. He didn't bother trying to defeat the expensive smart lock. He simply drove the bar into the doorframe and wrenched it back, snapping the locking mechanism with a sharp crack. The heavy wooden door swung wide, laying open the pristine interior of Cole and Vanessa's stolen home. The financial slaughter began immediately. The workers poured into the wide, sunlit foyer like a disciplined army of relentless locusts. Within minutes, the front doors were wedged permanently open, and the physical erasure of their entire pretentious world was underway in earnest. Two workers came through the doorway, hauling Vanessa's prized, custom-ordered French velvet sofas. I remembered the exact day she bought them. She had slid my platinum card across to an elite interior designer without a flicker of hesitation, running up tens of thousands of dollars in a single afternoon on the grounds that the living room needed to properly reflect her elevated social standing. I watched with deep, quiet satisfaction as the crew dragged those extraordinarily expensive white velvet sofas across the rough concrete porch, hoisted them over the rusted steel rim of the dumpster, and let them crash violently into the empty bin below. The delicate imported fabric shredded instantly against the container's sharp, rusted edges, destroying the massive investment in under 5 seconds. The relentless parade of destruction rolled on without a single pause. Another crew began hurling massive black garbage bags out of the second-story master bedroom window, aiming straight for the open dumpster below. The bags were packed to bursting with Vanessa's painstakingly curated, extraordinarily expensive designer wardrobe. Hundreds of silk dresses, premium leather handbags, and imported European shoes tumbled down into the filthy metal bin like ordinary household rubbish. She had carefully mapped out every luxury resort outfit she intended to wear on the ship's deck, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire material world was at that very moment being pitched into a garbage heap. Then came Cole's prized possessions. A worker strolled out of the garage carrying 2 heavy premium leather golf bags filled with custom-fitted, incredibly expensive carbon fiber clubs. Cole had always insisted he needed professional-grade equipment to properly network with wealthy executives. The worker grabbed the bags by their premium leather straps, swung them hard through the air, and launched them over the high steel wall of the dumpster. The deeply satisfying sound of bending shafts and snapping carbon fiber rang out across the quiet suburban street. I took another long, rewarding sip of my hot tea as a separate specialized team pulled up in a small utility van. They paid no attention to the mountain of furniture being violently discarded and walked straight to the front entrance. They carried heavy drills, fresh hardware, and thick metal strike plates. Dex Fontaine was officially securing his newly acquired asset. The crew stripped away the broken electronic smart locks Vanessa had previously programmed with her personal security codes and installed heavy commercial-grade deadbolts on every exterior door of the estate. Watching the physical manifestation of their total exclusion take shape was enormously satisfying. Even if Cole and Vanessa somehow managed to escape their floating prison and secure a ride back to that neighborhood, they would find absolutely nothing waiting for them. Their custom digital access codes were gone permanently. Their physical keys were entirely useless. They were locked out of the very property they had once claimed as their undeniable birthright. For 3 solid, chaotic hours, the extraction crew ruthlessly gutted the entire $2.2 million property. Every television, every piece of expensive modern artwork, every custom imported rug, every digital device left sitting carelessly on the marble kitchen counters, all of it was systematically stripped away. The massive steel dumpsters filled rapidly to the brim with the broken, ruined remnants of their thoroughly unearned, deeply pretentious lifestyle. Not one photograph, not one piece of expensive jewelry, Not a single pair of designer sunglasses escaped the unyielding corporate liquidation. Everything they owned, every item purchased with my stolen money, was treated as nothing more than discarded, worthless trash. When the job was finally done, the crew foreman blew a sharp whistle. The workers loaded back into their unmarked vehicles. A hydraulic diesel truck backed up to the driveway, secured the heavy steel dumpsters, and hauled them off toward the municipal landfill. The quiet, affluent neighborhood gradually settled back into its pristine, undisturbed state, entirely indifferent to the absolute devastation that had just played out on that particular lot. I stood on the sidewalk for a few more minutes, staring at the thoroughly emptied, fully secured house. The wide front windows, once framed by expensive silk curtains, now revealed only bare, hollow, echoing rooms. The complete physical erasure of Cole and Vanessa Whitaker was finished. They had no home to return to, zero possessions to their name, and entirely empty bank accounts. They were adrift in the middle of a freezing ocean, drowning in a profound, inescapable financial disaster entirely of their own arrogant making. I slowly crushed the empty paper cup in my right hand, turned away from the vacant, soulless estate, and walked back to my truck with a deep, absolute, and permanent sense of peace. 10 days is a remarkably short stretch in the full arc of a human life. But when you are trapped in a floating cage of your own financial ruin, 10 days can stretch into an agonizing eternity. I had no need to be standing at the port of Portland to know exactly how the miserable disembarkation was unfolding. My private investigator, Leon Grady, had positioned himself discreetly near the main terminal doors, feeding me detailed real-time audio updates from a safe distance. The colossal white ocean liner eased back to the dock beneath a heavy overcast sky, but there was no joy coming from the passengers I was tracking. While thousands of sunburnt, happily worn-out travelers streamed down the gangways, my treacherous son and his parasitic in-laws were held up. They were forcibly detained at the Central Guest Services desk for nearly 2 hours, locked in a fierce argument with the ship's purser over a substantial pile of unpaid onboard gratuities and mandatory service charges. With my platinum card permanently revoked and their personal accounts completely drained, they had no way to settle their final folios. Leon quietly reported that Vanessa was nearly unrecognizable. Her carefully constructed socialite facade had crumbled entirely. She was wearing the same wrinkled designer sweatpants she'd boarded in her face. Pale, her hair pulled into a messy, chaotic knot. Her parents, who had fully expected to be treated like nautical royalty, were radiating a toxic, seething silence, refusing to so much as glance in Cole's direction. Trent, grinding through 10 straight days of enforced involuntary sobriety, paced anxiously near the terminal exit, shivering in the damp Portland wind. They had spent the entire vacation isolated in their windowless cabins, eating complimentary buffet food and fighting bitterly over who bore ultimate responsibility for the catastrophic banking failure. They were entirely convinced a massive automated fraud alert had temporarily frozen their assets. They genuinely believed that the moment they stepped off the ship and picked up a cellular signal, one aggressive call to the bank would instantly restore their unearned wealth. They scraped together the absolute last of their physical currency. Between all 5 of them, they managed to pull together just over $60 in loose, crumpled bills, barely enough to cover a single standard economy taxi van for the long drive back to the suburbs. Leon watched from a distance as they awkwardly wrestled their enormous, heavy designer suitcases into the rear of a scuffed, yellow vehicle. They crammed into the back seats like miserable sardines, knees pressed together, the thick tension inside that cab suffocating every one of them. Cole scrambling to hold on to whatever trace of authority he still possessed, loudly assured his furious father-in-law that everything would be sorted within the hour. He insisted the banking situation was a simple clerical error and fiercely vowed to go straight to the local courthouse first thing the following morning. He declared he would file the emergency guardianship petition immediately, have his father declared legally incompetent, and finally seize permanent control of the entire family fortune. He was plotting my complete legal destruction from the cramped back seat of a foul-smelling, poorly maintained commercial cab. The yellow van merged into busy traffic, working its way toward the well-manicured streets of Lake Oswego. The ride took nearly 45 minutes. Every mile brought them closer to the ultimate devastating reality check of their wretched lives. I was seated comfortably in Conrad Paxton's downtown office tower, listening quietly to the live audio feed as the cab finally turned into their exclusive tree-lined residential neighborhood. The serene streets looked exactly as they always had, right up until the taxi rolled to a slow stop in front of the familiar premium double lot. The sudden absolute silence that must have fallen inside that cab was genuinely magnificent to imagine. The beautiful property they had called their own was transformed beyond all recognition. It no longer resembled a pristine, multi-million-dollar residential sanctuary. It looked like a highly aggressive, incredibly active commercial construction zone. Dex Fontaine had wasted no time at all maximizing his brand-new investment. The immaculate green lawn Vanessa had previously obsessed over with fierce, relentless intensity was deeply scarred by heavy diesel tire tracks. A massive, bright red commercial real estate sign had been driven into the soft front yard, displaying the word "Sold" in enormous, undeniable white letters. The elegant custom front doors had been torn out entirely and replaced with heavy sheets of raw plywood, secured with thick steel chains and oversized commercial padlocks. Several of the large bay windows along the lower level were covered in thick plastic sheeting, actively being prepared for rapid, highly intrusive corporate remodeling. The massive house was completely dark, entirely hollowed out, and stripped of every trace of the domestic life that had once filled it. But the true horror of their situation was waiting for them right there on the damp concrete curb. Leon quietly narrated the chaotic scene as Cole and Vanessa stumbled out of the yellow cab mouths, hanging open in sheer, mind-numbing shock. They stood frozen on the public sidewalk, staring blankly at the spot where their municipal trash bins normally sat on collection day. Carelessly heaped into a massive, chaotic pile were dozens of heavy black industrial garbage bags. The bags were splitting at the seams, exposing the ruined, discarded remnants of their entire heavily financed, pretentious lifestyle. A crushed, badly bent carbon fiber golf club jutted sharply out of one overstuffed bag. An expensive, carefully imported designer silk dress spilled from another, soaking through against the dirty, wet pavement. Dex Fontaine's demolition crew had followed my instructions with ruthless precision. They had cleared the sprawling property down to the bare wooden studs, stripping out every single material item Cole and Vanessa had ever proudly called their own. And perched on top of that massive pile of discarded, completely ruined merchandise was a large, hand-painted cardboard sign scrawled in thick black permanent marker by one of the anonymous demolition workers. It read simply, "Free to take." Cole let his expensive leather travel bag drop onto the wet sidewalk. He took 2 unsteady steps toward the garbage heap, his mind unable to process what his eyes were telling him. Vanessa let out a guttural scream, a sound of pure despair that rang down the quiet street. Her furious parents stood motionless behind the idling cab, utterly disgusted. The reality was finally landing. Their precious son-in-law was a completely broke, entirely homeless fraud who had just been methodically dismantled by the very man he had tried to destroy. While Leon quietly fed me the glorious details of that curbside meltdown through my earpiece, I was nowhere near the Lake Oswego area. I was settled comfortably in a plush leather armchair inside the exclusive first-class lounge at Portland International Airport. The noise of the terminal was fully absorbed behind thick glass windows, I was nursing a perfectly brewed espresso, watching massive commercial jets taxi slowly across the wet tarmac. The stark contrast between my calm, luxurious surroundings and the total devastation unfolding on that damp suburban sidewalk was deeply satisfying. I had booked a premium flight to a quiet, sun-drenched island in the Caribbean, a decision I had reached easily because I genuinely deserved a real vacation. After painstakingly dismantling the treacherous lives of my only son and his arrogant wife, I took another slow sip, feeling the warmth settle in my chest and dissolve the last traces of tension still living there. My phone sat face down on the polished glass table beside my espresso cup. The screen stayed dark for several minutes as Leon wrapped up his surveillance report and ended our secure call. He confirmed that the furious parents had already hailed a separate taxi, abandoning their disgraced daughter and humiliated son-in-law on the side of the road without a second look. I knew exactly what was coming next. Cole would tear through the standard stages of grief and panic in rapid succession. He would frantically try to force his way into his frozen banking apps. He would desperately try to contact the corporate real estate agency listed on that enormous red sign staked into the front yard. And finally, when every last exit had been slammed shut, he would be forced to call the one man he had so coldly plotted to lock away in a sterile medical facility. Right on cue, the phone lit up and buzzed hard against the smooth glass tabletop. The caller ID showed Cole's name. I didn't answer right away. I leaned back in my chair and watched the screen flash, letting it ring 5 full times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted the cold, inescapable weight of his financial ruin to settle deep into his bones before he heard my voice. On the 6th ring, I reached over, picked up the phone, and pressed the green button. I raised it to my ear and said nothing, perfectly, deliberately silent. "Dad." Cole's voice cracked through the receiver, pitched high with an unfamiliar, frantic hysteria. "Dad, what the hell is going on? Where are you?" "You need to fix this right now. Our house is completely locked up. There are heavy wooden boards over the front windows. Some insane construction company threw all of our clothes in a pile on the street." I could hear the roar of passing traffic in the background, cut through by the sharp, breathless sound of Vanessa sobbing. She was wailing continuously, a raw, unbroken sound of pure material loss. "My bank accounts are empty." Cole continued, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "The joint emergency fund is completely wiped out. My personal debit cards are declining. The cruise line humiliated us in front of everyone. They locked our cabin cards. Vanessa's parents just left us standing on the sidewalk. You have to call the bank. You have to call the police. Someone stole our identity. Someone took the house. Dad, you have to do something right now." He was nearly hyperventilating, desperately clinging to the faint hope that this was all some massive, catastrophic mistake. He was still playing the role of the alarmed, innocent son, counting on his wealthy father to come rushing in and pull him back from the edge. I took a slow, deliberate breath and let his frantic demands hang in the silence between us. When I finally spoke, my voice was a smooth, ice-cold whisper of complete authority. "I do not have Alzheimer's, son," I said, pressing each word into the air with absolute precision. But I did have a profound, life-altering epiphany. The silence that followed on the other end of the line was total. The street noise seemed to go still. Even Vanessa's hysterical crying choked off abruptly into a sudden, terrified quiet. The full weight of what I had just said hit him square in the chest. He understood in that instant that I knew everything. I didn't give him time to piece together a lie. I laid out the complete, inescapable shape of his new reality. I sold the house, Cole. I continued, my voice carrying no trace of parental warmth or mercy. I liquidated the entire Lake Oswego property to a corporate cash buyer 2 days ago, It was an unconditional, strictly as-is transaction. That means every piece of custom furniture, every designer handbag, and those expensive golf clubs you were so proud of legally belonged to the demolition crew. I explicitly instructed them to treat your possessions exactly like the garbage you both proved yourselves to be. "Dad, please!" Cole whimpered, his voice collapsing into a broken, hollow whisper. "You cannot do this to us. You gave us that house. It was ours. It was a revocable trust." I corrected him, even and smooth. "A trust I permanently revoked the same day you chose to cancel our family cruise with a cowardly text message. And those bank accounts you're crying about, I drained them. I legally transferred every cent of my money into a secure solo account. You have nothing left, Cole. You are officially bankrupt, completely homeless, and entirely cut off from the wealth you so arrogantly assumed you were entitled to take. No, 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 you cannot leave us like this." Cole pleaded, his voice overtaken by genuine suffocating panic. "We have nowhere to sleep tonight. We don't have money for a hotel. We don't even have money for food. You have to help us. We are your family." "You stopped being my family the exact moment you sat in that room and actively plotted to have me locked away in a medical facility," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, freezing register. "You thought you could have me declared mentally incompetent and walk away with my entire fortune." I paused, listening to his terrified breathing. Vanessa had started screaming in the background, begging me to forgive them. I ignored her entirely and delivered the final blow. "By the way, Conrad sent a copy of your fraudulent incapacity petition and the corrupt doctor's signature directly to the FBI. Conspiracy to commit elder fraud." Cole made a choked, horrible sound. "You are looking at a very lengthy federal criminal indictment," I added. "I'd strongly suggest you use whatever loose change you have left to find a defense attorney." I ended the call, picked up my premium travel bag, and walked toward my gate with a steady, unhurried stride, ready to begin my new life. And that is where this story ends. Not with shouting, not with a courtroom scene, but with a phone call, a gate, and a man walking toward something new. Looking back, I won't pretend this was without cost. Loving a child the way a parent does, and then watching that same person plot your destruction, that hollows something out in you that never fully refills. What I learned is that protecting yourself is not a betrayal of love. It is sometimes the only honest thing left to do. I believe God has a way of restoring what was taken from you, not always in the form you expected, but in full and in His timing, not yours. If this story taught anything worth carrying forward, let it be these things. First, generosity extended to people who are already planning against you is not kindness, it is fuel. Know the difference. Second, when someone moves to take your legal rights, move faster. Document everything, say nothing, and act before they expect you to. Third, a revocable trust is only as powerful as the person who holds the pen. Never sign away your authority while you still need it. Fourth, if the people closest to you are treating your mind as the enemy, trust your mind. If this story reached something in you, if it reflected something you've seen in your own family or your own life, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already subscribed to Dad Revenge, there are more stories here, and every one of them is about people who refused to go quietly. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I mean that. Take care of yourself out there.